Allegiance. Roll call, please.
Sabers. Here. Rice.
Here.
Dosher. Here. McCardle.
Here.
Barrington.
Here.
Allen.
Here.
Charts. Smith.
We have a quorum. Citizens input. Excuse me. If you need to address the mayor and members of the city council on an item that is not on the agenda, excluding personnel items, please come forward to the podium and state your name and your concern. Presentations are limited to 3 minutes. Items will be considered, but no action will be taken this time. Does anybody wish to address the council? Oh, Mr. Roth, I thought you had something to say. Couple items I want to bring up. The water bills this month will include a little statement about BY Water not meeting their treatment techniques. That's mainly due to the flooding that had occurred in Nebraska, as well as the break of the dam near Spencer, Nebraska, which caused some turbidity in the water where the intake is at the BY, which is kind of between Springfield and Yankton. So that's what that's all about, in case people are interested. The water is safe to drink. And then I would like to recognize that our drinking water compliance, we were awarded some awards in excellence from the state of South Dakota. Safe drinking water is all too often taken for granted. DNR wishes to recognize the city of Mitchell with the Secretary's Award for Drinking Water Excellence and delivering safe drinking water to their customers for 16 consecutive years. That's from Secretary Perner. Also goes on to say, year after year, the City of Mitchell's system operations specialists have worked tirelessly to provide safe drinking water, establish a legacy that will benefit future generations. So with that, Lauren Skinner, Carrie Plooster, Eugene Wegeman, Tyler Peterson, Thomas Schuman, and Kevin Simpson were recognized and given awards and certificate, as well as the city. So I appreciate their efforts. Thank you. With that, we'll go to, anybody else have anything they want to bring up? Okay. With that, we'll move on to item 5, action to approve special warranty deed, and this relates to the Casey's property on Main Street here. What we're looking at doing is transferring Mrs. Charks. Nice to see you. What we're doing is looking at working out a deal with the Mitchell Area Development Corporation that will turn this property over to them. They have an business interest in it, which will put it back on the tax rolls for the city of Mitchell. There will be a new building built there, which will house a boot. Am I okay to say all this? Okay, I will not say it. Sorry. It will house a business. And anyway, we're working on, in essence, turning it over to Mitchell Area Development Corporation for them to work out a deal with somebody interested in the property. So, okay.
Just one question before, and Justin, I directed to you. Just want to make sure the restrictions were explained to us about what that property could be used for, and I want to make sure that in your discussions with the Development Corp that they understand that the restrictions that are in place on that, and that's what the special warranty deed calls out. And I didn't really see the restrictions in there, but it refers to us being the grantee and them the grantor, and make sure that Development Corp understands what the restrictions are.
Right. So there is as Stephanie highlighted here, there's the paragraphs that makes the grantee responsible for complying with any restrictions of record, which would be all the conditions that Casey's put in their last deed. They're not specifically mentioned here, but anything that was contained in the deed record up to this point, they take the property subject to that.
Okay.
And then we've added, obviously, our own conditions here as well.
And we did provide them with a full list of the restrictions that came from Casey's when the city received the property.
We also talked to Casey's and made sure they were okay with what we're
Move
doing.
to approve. Second.
Motion by Mr. Allen, second by Mr. Barrington. Further discussion? Anybody in the audience wish to address this one? Now that I've said more than I should have, I guess. I'm sorry. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Okay, with that, we'll adjourn, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Rice for the special meeting and work session.
Okay, we will call the work session into existence, and there's not really any procedure for what we're going to cover, although we will limit it to the topic of the recycling research and information. And Kyle, I don't know if you want to have different people come up and present us with the information. The agenda does have part of the PowerPoint, and I'm assuming we'll go through that and other things.
Yes, sir. So we really wanted this work session to talk about the goals and council direction. So one of the goals is a short-term plan for the city of Mitchell, and the other one is a long-range plan for recycling in Mitchell. So as we go through the presentation, Neil will go through this PowerPoint and discuss some of the issues and go through the history and go through the issues that we're dealing and what we're facing with most recently. We want to talk mainly when we're discussing a short-term and long-range plan is what does the city see as far as a short-term recycling operation? We've got different options through the RFP program with curbside pickup, and there's benefits having that curbside pickup in single stream, obviously. There's participation increase. The downside is with a single stream, and Neil will go into more of the details and definitions if you don't understand what I'm talking about. I just wanted to go through an overview. But with a single stream, everyone throws their recyclables in one bin. There's a participation increase because it's easy. It's more costly on a downside, and there's more contamination. We'll talk about contamination as we get into the PowerPoint. Curbside sort, similar to it's actually what we have now. We find that there's less participation. People aren't as eager to participate themselves in the sorting process. So you have less participation. The benefit is it's less costly to the residents, and there are cleaner waste streams, and we'll talk about what that means for the recycling products when you have a cleaner waste stream. So those were the short-term plans that we were looking at getting more direction from the council on what's important for the city of Mitchell on an actual recycling program short-term. Long-range goals, it would be nice to get that direction from the council as well. In addition to what the type of operation, is there any municipal ownership in that operation? Is there any municipal participation? And Kevin can talk to the facts that the city actually does participate in some aspects of recycling as well when it comes to tires, when it comes to mattresses, things of that nature. So long-range plan, we want to know, is there a public involvement to have city ownership or more investment in recycling? Is there a need for the city to participate in their downtown areas and their businesses? And what does that mean? And then we'll talk to the challenges on the recycling market. What types of plastics are accepted, what types of plastics are actually recycled, and why. Again, contamination is a big issue with plastics, as well as glass and paper and cardboard. We'll talk about glass and the recycling product that's available for clear glass versus brown glass or colored glass. And then the contamination of materials. Obviously, cleaner is better. It's able to be sent to recycling, and that material is marketable. And then we want to get into what the city will do in the future on education and maybe some public outreach. So with that, I'll turn it over to Neil to go through the PowerPoint on recycling update.
All right. First of all, I want to say, appreciate this opportunity to. Can you all hear me? Hear me better? No. Not hear me? It's on. It's on? Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate this opportunity to kind of give you a little bit of some findings that I have compiled as a result of doing some research in regarding to recycling. And I'll probably highlight a little bit of more on what Kyle had just stated in regards to recycling. And I've already kind of started a 30-page narrative, but I want to finish that narrative after we have our discussions here, because perhaps there might be some information that I've already started that is not going to be relevant to us, or perhaps I need to elaborate a little bit more on it based off of our conversations. So with this, I'd like to maybe just reserve our questions till I get through the PowerPoint, because then you may get those questions answered throughout there. And then at the end, I'll probably have Kyle and Kevin and whoever else who wishes to comment on this to either correct me or elaborate on some of the things that I've said, or if I'm missing something, to please add. So, on. Okay. There we go. There we go. Okay, just a little bit. This is kind of what we're going to talk about.
You got it down?
Yeah. Okay, for first of all, I'm going to just give you a little bit of a little brief history on recycling, and I'll kind of go through a little bit of some of the terms so that you be somewhat familiar with what we're talking about, and a little bit about recycling as a public policy. I did find some information on some places that have done research on public opinion of recycling. However, I will qualify that. That's nothing in Mitchell or South Dakota per se. This is just from some of the national public opinions. And some of the things that you probably have seen in various news articles and so forth and publications about what's happening with recycling. And I'll give you a little bit of talking about some of that is also just things that are happening in the world, so to speak. And then maybe we'll talk a little bit of what are some other types of recycling programs. And then again, like what Kyle had mentioned, this is where we would really like to hear from you, is what's your expectations on recycling? So. A little bit about the history of it. I mean, recycling's been around since forever. I mean, we've always been recycling our various products that we've used, and we keep using things until they can't use them any longer. However, it seems to be, through at least in American history, where recycling became part of our culture, so to speak, was during World War II, is when we had to, actually World War I and II, where we instantaneously had to change our whole manufacturing concepts, where all of a sudden we were making materials and then we had to hurry up and switch and make them into weapons and so forth. So that's when industry started really making the change to how they had to retrofit making products into a different, and very, very quickly. And so a lot of technology came out of that as a result of the world wars there. However, it was probably about the 1970s is when environmental policy started becoming on the national scene. That's when a lot of those other acts, like you said, clean water, air, endangered species, and then the EPA was born in the 1970s. So hence, that's why many of the conversations we're having, at least from the governmental level, have evolved. However, I want to make this one point. There is no national recycling law. There is no, even DNR doesn't, there is no national recycling things that you have to do it such and such a way. There is no regulatories. However, what I will say is both EPA and South Dakota DNR, along with a lot of nonprofits and a lot of other commercial entities as well, do have a variety of products available, either at little or no cost. Some of them have funding, some have various best practices and things of that nature, but like I said, there is no recycling police, so to speak. So I just want to make sure that we're aware that we pretty much don't have to worry about a compliance per se. Okay. A couple things, and I've got in my narrative a whole bunch of various facts about recycling that we probably don't even really realize. That, for example, one thing is that EPA has estimated that about 75% of Americans' waste is recyclable. However, we only recycle about 30% of it. And so that's one of the things. The U.S. recycling rate, according to the EPA, is around 34%. And it's estimated that if the nation achieves 75%, that's the same effect as taking 50 million cars off the U.S. world. So those are just some things such as the USA throws away 11.4 billion worth of recyclable containers and packaging every year. So that just to kind of, there's a bunch of other little did you know facts, but I will give those to you. But there's some really interesting tidbits that we take for granted in doing recycling. So there are some different types. Obviously, we have, like we talked about, there's the curbside, which we do have. Many places have what they call drop-off centers. In many other communities, they have that. Some of them are very, they can basically, you dump all the recycles into one. Some are very sorted by plastics, papers, things of that nature. We've always had those for like electronics and so forth. You've probably heard about those, and then a lot of them have, very special events and those types of things for special drop-offs. So that's also part of the recycling, the waste stream. Buyback centers don't seem to be as popular. That's kind of remember back in the days where you take your recycling cans and so forth and get some coins or so forth out of it. So those are some of the processes that we do recycling. And again, that varies from community to community and who's providing that type of service. So there's a tons of different other things that we may not necessarily think are recycling, that we're recycling, but we are. It just might not be under an organized system. It might be just like a once or twice a year thing, like that. The sorting process varies. Obviously, we have what they call dual stream or multi-stream or those types of things. That's what we have. What's another term for it is called source separation. In other words, at the source, the products are separated. And that's similar to what we have now. So in other words, you're taking them from the source and you're separating it. Whereas in some of the other ones, the single stream, which he alluded to, is everything's put at once, and then the sorting is done at a facility. Just like you see where that picture is, where they're actually taking out and sorting the products there. So it's just a difference of where the product is sorted at. Is it at the source? Is it maybe perhaps on, like the Pendle does, right there on the truck, so to speak? Or is it in other places where they just lump it all together and then they sort it at a facility? The recycling loops will then kind of vary a little bit because it depends on how the product comes to the particular facility. Is it already sorted? Is it pre-sorted? And then it depends on how that gets distributed. Because what happens is certain products will go to certain vendors, obviously, and things of that nature. So there's what is called the loop, so to speak. And so then it depends on, is that product, for example, if this water bottle ends up being recycled, is it back to a water bottle again? Or is it perhaps used for something different? So those are what the difference are. They have like what is called a closed loop. Closed loop means it's used basically as the same product. So in other words, they keep using the same thing over and over and over. Whereas this might end up being a chair someday, or this might end up being something totally different. So that's kind of what it is. But a little bit back, since I just happened to have a bottle here, what had happened over through the industry, what is to help recyclers a little bit, was they've developed what are called like recycling codes. So for example, I'm just going to talk about plastics because that does seem to be predominantly what we like that is being recycled. There are 7 different codes on plastic, and only code number 1 and 2 is what's actually recycled. So if you think about that, that means in everything that's not, we have lots of things are plastic, but there's only a couple of them, the types that are actually recyclable. Perhaps some of the other ones are, but those are primarily 1 and 2. 1 is primarily found in soft drink and water bottles. Type 2 is found in most of the hard plastics, such as milk jugs, laundry detergent bottles, and some of the dishware. Type 3 would be something like shampoo bottles, shower curtains, hula hoops, credit cards, and things of that nature. Type 4 would be like what you find in shopping bags, and squeezable bottles, tote bags, clothing, furniture, carpet. Type 5 would be like syrup bottles, straws, Tupperware, and some automotive parts. Top 6 is like meat trays, egg cartons, clamshell cutters, and compact disc. And type 7 are bulletproof materials such as 3 and 5 gallon water bottles and sunglasses. So the reason I mention that is, so when somebody says, well, you're recycling plastics, no, not all plastics. That's just one example of the different types. I mean, you can talk about cardboard and all those other types of things, but I'm just using plastic kind of because that seems to be the main thing that people like to recycle. Okay, some pros and cons of recycling. Now, these are just based off of national publications. I mean, we all may have a different, or each individual opinions of whether it's good or bad, but these are based, what I did here is I tried to consolidate based off of what a lot of the literature says, or people who are either advocates for recycling or critics of recycling. So, again, we may all have our own personal biases, but one of the things that are some of the advantages of recycling, obviously, is it does reduce pollution because you're getting things out of the soils and things of that nature, and less products just less, obviously, in the oceans and so forth. It protects the environment and natural resources, does reduce energy because in many instances, it takes less energy to recycle a bottle than it is to make it. So that's one of the primary arguments of many things. Obviously, it saves landfill space. It does create some jobs. And in some cases, it can be very profitable, obviously, if it's done properly. And they don't need to be closed loop. In other words, the technology is constantly changing, that they're obviously thinking of new uses for everything. So, and it creates a lot of education opportunities. So it's something that it's very tangible that a lot of people can do, and they feel like they're participating in the environment. It's something that you can teach young people and so forth. Disadvantages, obviously, if you had to start up a program, it would cost. There's always some capital upfront cost you would have. And if it's not done properly, obviously the sites can sometimes not be the most attractive of places because you always got to store those types of things. You're always going to have debris. You may have, litter here and there and things like that. And then in some cases, some people question whether something that is recycled is of quality that you want. So, and again, some places do have what we call mandatory recycling laws, and my research with that is sometimes that doesn't seem to always be the most viable option because it's very hard to monitor. It's very hard, again. Can you imagine that there's no EPA or SDA or DNR police? Can you imagine if we had to be our own? So that's one of the things that I just want to say, that the jury seems to be out if you mandate it somehow. Now we'll talk a little bit about some of the perceived disadvantages of recycling. This is a little bit what they've estimated that 53% of the people who do have recycling automatically. In other words, it's a service that's provided for you. However, even out of that much, only about 44% participate. This is one of the things that they do say that might be how you could try to measure whether it's effective in your place is curbside seems to be the most popular way to do it because it's right close to the residents versus if they have to take their product somewhere else, that inconvenience does seem to affect participation too. So, and it's very hard to measure that. So, one of the things that I did find is a study that called the Recycling Partnership did in the basically based off of 26 data. And here are some of the findings that they kind of went through just so that as you kind of keep in mind. One of the things that they strongly suggest that once you're evaluating any program is what they basically call the waste audit. And there's different ways you can measure that. And basically what you could do there is, because it's simply, it's hard to gauge what your programs, what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish if you don't know what your intakes are, exactly how much recyclable material is getting left at is actually into the landfill, what percentage of people, just look back at your own, how many recyclable items that you don't put out on the curb that you actually put in the garbage, if you will, and so forth. So are some suggestions and some industry standards where they've mentioned how you could actually measure that. So that might be something, and I'll probably reiterate that throughout this presentation, that probably would be wise for us to do, because at least maybe before an RFP comes out, so that you have some anticipation. Or it would also be whomever does our recycling, that might be something to require that, so we have some way of quantifying what's happening in recycling in the Mitchell. But a couple things that this study did reveal that I thought it would be worth sharing is they didn't see that there's a lot of difference between comparing whether the collection was actually done by a public entity or a private entity. It doesn't seem to be the rates don't seem to be, or participation rates don't seem to be, or the diversion rates a whole lot difference. There's some variation, but it wasn't as significant. So that's just something we want to keep in the back of your mind, that based off of this study. Single stream does seem to bring a little bit more participation, obviously, because it's a little more convenient, because you don't have to sort it. However, again, like we'll talk about a little bit more, is there is a cost involved in that. And then in some places where they did see automatic versus an opt-in or subscription. Opt-in or subscription means that the party actually contracts with the providers, independent of us. So for like us, we mandate that you will have to pay it. It'd be the difference between if you just did it individually. And it does seem to, participation rate does seem to be a little lower versus you have to because they feel like they're. And so, but what they did find, one other thing is the biggest participant, or the biggest factor that's affecting participation is what exactly is the community doing to promote or advocate for recycling, and also their provider, and how comprehensive is that discussion done. And then also there's also what is happening in a lot of our rural areas, which I guess in the grand scheme of things we would be considered that, is they're seeing more and more what they call a hub and spoke. The hub would be, for example, Mitchell and perhaps Mount Vernon, Ethan, or so forth, are actually part of our program, so to speak, to help increase participation or help increase the market, where they might piggyback off of our contract or so forth. And the reason for that may or may not be advantageous to a provider because you just have a bigger volume, and if it's close enough and there's not enough those types of things. So that might be something later down the road. Again, it just depends on the circumstances, depends where the landfill is, who has that arrangement, what kind of garbage collection takes place in those other communities. And so there's a lot of other factors, but it is something that is getting more and more common. And so if you hear the term hub and spoke, that's what they're talking about. And then, like I said, what they found is in here, it's where it gets really tricky to do is on multifamily. That varies from place to place. And exactly what is multifamily? Is it 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, so forth? And in the grand scheme of things, if you kind of look at it this way, not everybody lives in a house like we do. You got to look at it this way, because this is the grand scheme of, like, you're talking like in Chicago and New York City, where a lot of people are in high rises and so forth. So if you take this from the national perspective, and you know that, because if you look at it that way, there's, I don't know about you, but I've been in Chicago in places, and there's probably more people in couple blocks than there is in the whole city. You know, so that's one of the things that when you're looking at this from a national perspective, that it's a little tricky to do this. So that's why sometimes trying to narrow this down to a community like Mitchell, it's there. So, but that might be the thing is to keep in mind in multifamily is things such as assisted living complexes, nursing homes, school dormant, or, you know, residence halls. You know, so you think about that whole concept of all those other residences, or residents, who may not be participating, and perhaps there is an opportunity where they can participate. So that's just something to keep in mind, and perhaps I'll leave, others can comment on that as well, exactly how Mitchell does that. But, and so now we'll talk a little bit about single stream for what I've been able to gather off of single stream. It does seem to be, seems to be the most popular, about 2/3 of the programs in the nation use single stream. And one of the pros, obviously, is that it's obviously back, is again, I'm being repetitive, but it's easy for customers. It's, you lump it all together. You don't have to do any sorting. It does increase the diversion rate and participation rate because, again, it's a convenient, very efficient. You just throw it all in one place. However, you know, but the municipal recycling facility does have to process more materials. And it may also decrease your garbage collection costs because if more stuff is taken out of the garbage is into the recycling, it may or may have an effect on that because you don't have as much going in transporting or into the landfills. So that's, in some cases, it may have an effect on your garbage collection. Obviously, the cons is you have lots of contamination, obviously. Again, people aren't sorting out the recycles at the site. And again, back to the lower quality of perhaps the product that is coming out of the recycling. And on either one or two things is you have more manual or equipment to have to sort the product. And obviously then one of the biggest factors that seems to be is glass, obviously, because you don't take a whole lot of glass to break and you've got all kinds of issues in there. So, so there is a little bit of an increased cost. So regardless of which system that they're promoting is one of the things that it seems like the recycling industry and also other industries are promoting is not only which system that you're having is getting people to actually recycle right. It seems to be the terminology. So for example, I'll just use one example that we use very common is pizza boxes. Everybody may think that a pizza box is recycled, not if it's had a pizza in it. You know, or if you didn't wash out the food off of your product or that you thought was recycling, no. Or, you know, so those are the types of things that where public education can be very beneficial. And regardless whether you think that it should be on the consumer end or it should be on the other end. So, but if there's something on the consumers, regardless whether you go single stream, if they can actually put more the right recyclings in, or at least preparing the recyclables right, then that would also change the quality of what you have. And then there's some other things as well. And then again, if you go by a drop-off center, again, is what exactly is that going to look like? But regardless of what you think there, and I'm probably going to repeat this again, is perhaps it would be wise before we do initiate a recycling or change it or not change it or consider it is there should be we perhaps could come up with some way of actually polling what our community or residents think. And maybe there are some ways that they, you know, give us some suggestions on, or also it's one way of gauging what they think is recyclable and what may not be recyclable. And this is maybe some things that we could do. And that might, in partnership with whoever happens to be our provider, that might be something worth consideration too. So that's just a suggestion on our part. Again, back to the research, the research does seem to indicate that The public does seem to be wish that we would have more recycling, being able to recycle. Obviously, there's tons of PSAs you see. I mean, you're seeing these all over the television anymore. It does seem to be part of many school curriculums and so forth. So the initiative is out there on various things. Also, you're seeing more and more products actually advertising the fact that their products are recycled. And there's also serious changes that industry is changing. One presentation that we saw, staff saw, and I've seen it in other places, but one example is, I don't know if any of you use you take your laundry detergent, for example, Tide is, you used to have the big old plastic jugs. Now they have the little teeny cube things, so that's one of the things that was probably one of the most aha moments that you see where industry's changing. And there's all kinds of them that are out there, but that was one of the things that, if you just think about all the products that you used to have and how they've reduced them down and things of that nature. And but the public is just saying, but one of the things that the polls did reveal, is they said, according to a Pew Research, it said 56% of Americans said detailed information about recycling is readily available, while 44% said it is not, and they have to seek it out. So that tells you that we're perhaps not doing a very good job of telling people what is exactly, what is our standards here? What is the recyclable in Mitchell versus maybe what you're seeing in other places? So that might be something that was kind of an aha moment that regardless when we do draft our RFP or perhaps there is maybe we could probably think of some other ways that in partnership that we could get the message out, so to speak, and maybe localize it. Like I said, there are tons of models out there that we could borrow. Again, one of the things that you probably have heard about, or maybe you have not, but you'll see that there is a ton of changes. I just used the example of the Tide bottle just recently. But again, industry is changing very, very rapidly on what's recyclable and not. And one of the things you can just actually, as a consumer, you could also look on the bottle that you just have here too. There's a green leaf on here. And so that's one of the things that we kind of look for. But however, in 2019, actually over the last couple of years, China was at one point one of our biggest purchasers of recycling materials. Well, over the last couple of years, they pretty much have cut that off because their standards for contamination are basically the U.S. can't comply. So as a result, about 40% of what was our market is gone. So what the industry has had to do is either go to another market, obviously in other countries, or either one or two things, is it gets back into the landfill. And so what's happening there is that the market value of many of these recyclables has just plummeted over the last couple of years. So the reason we want to mention that is it's possible we may hear from some of the people who are doing recycling and providers that these things have had such a major effect on the marketability of them. So that's just something I think that municipalities should be aware of, that because of these activities that have happened all over all the world, has had a dramatic effect on the marketability of these. So, and again, industry is always changing. And the other thing that's affecting it is the price of oil, too, because petroleum products, a lot of products are produced by petroleum. Well, then it's actually cheaper now with the oil. Then at some places it's actually cheaper for them to actually make it from a raw than it is from recycle because of So there's some other things that are affecting it as well. But I just wanted to be very aware. And if you'll probably, like I said, you may have saw some news articles about this as well.
Neil, can I interrupt for a minute? I just wanted to expand on a little bit what you talked about on education and recycling. If you think about from generation to generation, there's a different idea of what that term means. So if we go to an older generation, maybe World War II, baby boomers, and you ask them if they recycle, they'll say, yes, I recycle. I buy a glass jar of mayonnaise. I use the mayonnaise. I rinse it out. I put something else in it. And then when I'm done using it, I'll put it in my garage and I'll store all my nuts and bolts in it. That is recycling, right? But if you ask a millennial what they do to recycle, they say, I throw the glass jar in the bin. I recycle. So I think that's a big gap that we have from generation to generation. That's a hurdle that we have to overcome for education and getting our message across of what recycling is. In addition to what Neil said about China, if you can think about all of the products that we buy from China, and it comes over in barges, barge after barge comes in, and they take that material off, and then you had these empty barges. Well, it was easy to just pack all of our recyclable material on those barges and it's sent back to China. So that cost is different now since those barges are empty and not taking recycling back to China. So there's a big difference in what we had going on before to what's happening now.
Yep. Okay, again, I'll give you just a little thumbnail sketch, and then we can always at a later date, if there's a certain system that you're attracted to, we can maybe get some feedback from that particular town who has that type of system to delve into that a little bit further. But the one thing I have found is, at least in the first-class cities, the bigger cities, it's all over the board. You know, many of them have contractors, some don't, some have the municipality does it, some have their own, operate their own landfills, some don't, some have regional ones, some landfills are operated by the county, so there's other different types of cost involved, and then there's some that have a combination of it. And so there's some places have more than one contractor that provides the service. And some of them, the different towns have it versus it's just part of their garbage collection where they may come at a different day. The city may, or a contractor may come in a different day, or there's some that have what we have like now. I believe us in Aberdeen are very similar. But some have, like I said, the subscription service where it's up to the individual homeowner to actually subscribe if they wish to do it themselves. So, and again, that's why it was a little difficult sometimes when you're comparing their garbage rates to garbage rates, because sometimes they said, well, recycling is free. Well, no, there's no free in it. It's part of so it's just part of their whole system. They just happen to do it, so it's kind of hard to take that out. Whereas some have it as a separate fee, whereas also some have maybe a drop-off site, but they contract with another party to actually retrieve the materials and make sure it's out. It's their bin, so to speak, but they maybe put it on city property. And so they contract with somebody to come and take the materials out. So it is all over the board. Probably the one that's the most switched, that just recently switched, was Yankton about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half, and they went to a single stream. And so Pierre has drop-off points. Rapid City has their own MRF, actually in Rapid City. Sioux Falls, for example, they have different contractors that do it. And so it's all over the board. So if there is a certain particular system, I would advise us to actually go visit that town and maybe get some feedback from them, or have that town come to talk to us.
I know we're supposed to hold our questions, but I'm just curious, in Sioux Falls, do the individual households request who they want to collect their recycling, or how's that work?
Well, from what I gather, I don't know the whole town, I just happen to know because my mother-in-law lives in Sioux Falls, but she actually contracts with whoever. My understanding is, as part of their Sioux Falls ordinance, is if you want to be a garbage hauler in Sioux Falls, you have to provide recycling service. So whoever she contracts with does it. But I don't know if that's, how everybody else, or maybe it could be certain areas.
Do they have a buyback for the citizens to go ahead and put their trash in a container?
That I don't know.
Thought they did, maybe not.
Maybe, yeah, it could be. And again, if Kevin may know or Kyle may know more. This is just a little bit of a summary of what we have now, is the status quo. As you know, the contract will be expiring in December, so that's the reason we wanted to have this conversation. The current month, obviously, people will have to pay $4 a month for that. And then, so and we pay dependable $23,800 monthly. And in our case, everybody is charged the $4, however, participation is voluntary.
The $4 fee isn't voluntary.
No, correct, but participation is,
I've changed that. That's misleading.
oh, okay, I thank you for catching that, yes. Yeah, what I meant with that is the fee is mandatory, the participation is voluntary. Whereas, and that's not the case in a lot of other places. So basically what the city does is, once we take the 23.8 times, remit that, and then what we collect, that's what we get to keep. And plus, Dependable rents the building, rent building from us for $10,000 a year. And Kevin corrected me on this, and I don't know where I got the number from, but somewhere. But our participation rate is currently around 26% instead of that 30 to 40. However, that does seem to be the norm in most other places. So again, back to the EPA estimates, it's nationwide, it's about 34%. And our collection is weekly, same day as garbage, and on non-residential, that's very difficult for us to do because we don't keep track of that. So, and again, I stand corrected if there's anything else that I did. Again, this is just in summary. It would be wise to maybe do a waste audit, seek some type of public input at some point, gauge it, so then I think that would be helpful in drafting our RFP if we decide to do something different. You know, and maybe on some things, other things to decide is what is going to be our involvement, cities, I mean. What is the role of who's promoting it and monitoring it or regulating it, if there is going to be any regulation? Or is it going to be exclusive? I mean, we're going to allow other ones to do recycling or not. And the other thing is, and it probably wouldn't hurt if the city itself would actually do some type of recycling at our events. And at, you know, if we're going to encourage others to recycle, it probably wouldn't hurt for us to do it ourselves. You know, have recycling dispensers here, like at city facilities and events and so forth. So it's just something to keep in the back of our mind. If we're going to encourage it, that we should actually do it ourselves. So that's just something. And then again, visit maybe some other ones. And then, so basically, I was just going to leave it to that, and then I'll let, I'll yield to Kevin and Kyle to fill in the blanks or correct anything that I said, and then we'll just maybe just open this up for a discussion, and maybe there's some other parties that want to say something. So, hope this helped.
Thank you.
Stephanie, can I have you go back the slide right before this? Oh, Neil's got it, doesn't he? Neil's going to ask you a quick question just to clarify. Okay, so obviously we're charging everybody $4, and the current contract with Dependable is $23,800. And then you make a comment there, the city retains earnings from the fees collected and the monthly remittance to Dependable. Clarify the varies up to $20,000.
Well, it's very, I'll let Kevin talk about that.
Okay, that's probably part of your presentation.
Yeah.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Okay, well, Yuri,
Do you want to repeat the question?
yeah, just the last part of it. I was walking up here.
Okay, I was just wondering to clarify that $20,000 a year, is that what we collect versus what we pay? Varies 20,000 one way or the other?
No, it doesn't vary. It's the same amount every year. So everything above the 23,800, we get $4, and we got roughly 6,557 accounts. So I don't know if I figured that all out. We collect about 314,736 every year, and we pay Dependable $285,600, which is leaves us about in the positive 29,136. And then we get $10,000 a year for building lease. Above and beyond.
So basically, we get about $3,500 a month of clear over what we pay out, right?
Yeah,
Give or take?
yes, you're correct.
And Kevin, all the $4 times the 20, 30, 6,500.
Yep.
Those are all residents, no business.
Yes, that, I should, yeah, that's all commercial accounts, and that would include your, apartment complexes and everything. Even if an apartment complex has, say, 30 units in it, technically, all 30 units are being charged at $4. They might only have one collection point, like a dumpster or something. They might not each have a blue bin, but each residence is being charged $4.
What is a commercial, like, say, a BPI, I know they're closed, but.
It could be a box factory, Twin City Fan,
Shopko, they save their cardboard, but that
Yep.
doesn't,
Some
I'm
of
assuming
them
they
have-
sell it on their own, do they not, or do they bring it?
yeah, I
to the
think
city?
like Coburn's and Shopko and places like that, I think they have their own commercial generator. I mean, as far as their own compactor, when they're done with their boxes, they go out the back of their store and they go into a private compactor, I suppose, through,
And they collect the revenue off those?
Yes, they
versus
would.
A recycler?
Yes.
Okay.
but like CHR and businesses like that, Dependable or Petrick goes around to those and can collect all their cardboard, paper. And that's all, that stuff is not in, I got the numbers for what they go through, but I don't have, I mean, it's not like they're being charged by the city, that $4. That's
They're
kind of a
not.
free service for
We don't
them.
charge any commercial accounts.
Okay.
No, that's part of their contract.
Okay.
It's kind of free
And
for
that's
them.
That's one of our biggest volumes in the cardboard. We're doing way more cardboard by weight than what we do recycled because it's heavy. Box is heavier than a plastic bottle. But we're doing 75 or 80 cardboard accounts. Anywhere from 3 to 5 times a week. Like McDonald's, we do every day.
And if you look at, I handed out that little thing. If you look at the second page there, that's just, I just printed out 2018s. It just shows you what the curbside tonnage is compared to the commercial. And ever since 2005 or whatever, your commercial accounts run almost twice what the curbside recycling does. Your curbside average is about 440 ton a year, and your commercial average is between 7 and 800 ton a year, roughly. So your commercial accounts run about twice the tonnage on a year as your curbside does. So yeah, if you're looking at the first page, the blue line is just the total of the two, the curbside and the commercial combined. Your greenish yellow line there, that's, between that 6 and 7, or 6 and 800. That's kind of all, that's all your commercial since 2003. That's where your commercial kind of is run. And then your bottom line, your red line, that averages about 440 ton per year, is kind of where that runs. So you can see that your commercial is running, I would say 75 to almost 100% more than your curbside runs. I don't know if you got any more questions for me, but I would say over the course of the years, you know, the last couple of years, like 16, 17, and 18, they ran about, 2016 was about 1,162 ton a year. 2017 was 1,282 a year, and 2018 was 1,271 a year. The years between 2006 and 2016, they averaged about 1,050 a year. So, you know, depending on what you're looking at, right now, we're running right around 25, 26% participation. The 10 years before 2016, you were probably closer to 20% participation rate. So all in all, if you just kind of do, you know, depending on how you want to do the numbers, if you just do some quick math, you know, for that amount of years, if you were doing 20, if you run 20% participation rate, okay, you're taking that out of the landfill. Now, what you're doing is you're extending, technically, theoretically, you're extending the landfill by 20%. While it's a 130-year landfill.
Percent. Those are two different percentages. It doesn't extend the landfill by 20%. It can't, because this isn't the total, it's not 20% of the total waste that the city is using, it's only 20% of the recyclable.
I was doing it over the course of about 20 years.
That still doesn't,
Okay.
math doesn't work.
Okay.
Irregardless, you're adding to the life. Yeah, you're extending the life. of the
I had
life.
it, when I originally done it, when we did the report in 2011, I had 5 to 7 years.
5 to 7 years, and it's a 100-year, what's the total life of the landfill?
130 years.
130 years. And it adds 5 to 7 years?
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, that's like 5%. Yeah, okay. But we're now seeing items that are no longer being able to be sent to recycling, correct?
Right, that's correct. And a key to that is the participation as well. So you got two issues, and that's the participation of recycling and then the recycled materials that are actually a product that can be recycled. So I think, again, saving the life of the landfill is a key issue. You think about landfills and how much they cost as well. You're talking about purchase of additional lands and then digging out the cells, the actual operation. So you could also save from 5 to 7 years could relate to, you know, $10 million. Maybe in 30 years, maybe in 50 years, maybe 100 years. So the value is still there when you do the recycling.
So the cost for us to recycle fuel versus what we're saving, do we know what that looks like?
I guess that was one of my questions. How many miles do we drive and how much fuel do we use? Well, tell me what the garbage is. Tell me what the garbage pickup miles and fuel use. It can't be that much different. Because my concern on the whole deal is if I'm just measuring energy units, if I spend 100 energy units to recycle 70 energy units, I've just polluted 30%.
You've lost 30, yeah.
I don't understand your math. If you're going to do single stream, for example, you have to duplicate your effort 100% for recycling as you do for garbage.
Could I ask you one
Yep.
thing, please? Would you come up here to the microphone, because
I figured out so loud I heard everybody's ears.
but we're online.
Yep.
We're online, so, and on television, so people, that way people know, state your name.
I agree with
Just so
you.
people know
If you
who's
go
talking.
to single stream, I need to run a route to pick up single stream, and I also need to run a route to pick up garbage.
Yes, sir, that's my
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
Right.
But
So you-
that's not my question.
Okay.
My question is, if I'm picking up recycled material. And the energy content of the recycled material I pick up has, and I'm just making this up, has 70 units of energy.
Okay.
And I spend 100 units of energy picking it up, sorting it, and transporting it to Minneapolis, Omaha, Chicago, wherever I have to
The
transport it to.
key there is cleanliness.
But it doesn't matter. The material I picked up only has 70 units of energy, no matter how clean it is.
I
Because,
can't speak to the
because
energy.
the cleaning of it is additional energy that the processing facility has to put into it, which even makes it worse.
No, it.
So that's, goes back to the mayor's question.
But what you
of
have,
what is the energy?
What you have to look at and consider is the stories that you've been seeing. There was just a story on the television the other night. One in some city in California, I believe it was, where one of the largest haulers in the world, Waste Management, owned all the landfills. And they were going to discontinue the recycling because they could landfill it cheaper.
Cheaper.
But they do everything on a single stream, and that's the way it gets baled, is single stream. Well, that's why China isn't buying it, because it's so contaminated. Now, as an example, every single thing that we bale is baled on its own. For example, the aluminum has no plastic in it, the aluminum has no cardboard in it, so on, so on, so forth. We have gotten multiple awards for the quality of our recycling, and that's why we still enjoy the high prices today and have no problem getting rid of it.
So you don't, okay. So you
Our
don't-
only problem right now is mud. And we've got more of that we know what to do with. And I want to publicly thank Kevin for all the help the city's been with our roads out there. He's gone out of his way to help us. But I know I had to run a route today. We were a little shorthanded. And we had 3 trucks out instead of 2 out today. And we picked up over 600 bins today. I would like to invite all of the city council to come out and see what we do. Come during a period of the day, if it's possible, where we're in full production. For example, around noontime, we're in full-scale production right then. And you can see how things are done. Come right along on one of the trucks. We'll make room for you. We would like to have people see what we run into. And I don't mean to be derisive here, but when you pick up the blue bins and they're full of human and animal excrement, vomit, I've had people stuck with needles, cut with glass. We've had countless bottles that are obviously drug-related. Those types of things really kill your cleanliness rate, okay? But, when it's 40 below outside and you're dealing with a bin full of poop, it's not fun,
Literal poop? Like literally it's poop?
We have people actually bend over and go on purpose.
And so, just out of curiosity, when you find drug paraphernalia, do you report
I'm
that?
sorry,
When you find drug paraphernalia, do you report that to the police?
we just leave it in the bin. That's what we're told to do. I mean, it isn't necessarily, it's more often insulin needles. Well, it appears to be. So I'm not gonna get somebody in trouble for that, we just work around it. And we're taking, of the different plastics that were mentioned, we're taking some of almost all those numbers. For example, the 1x1 was a 3, it was a shampoo bottle. We have mountains of shampoo bottles. So that doesn't, the things that make us the craziest, in plastics at least, are the food plastics, the sandwiches come in, cakes come in. Well, those are fine if they wipe the cake or the frosting out of them. Just like pizza boxes are fine. But when we find a pizza box full of pizza, you get to keep the box. because we've been told over and over and over, don't put stuff in a garbage can. We still do on occasion. Our only item now that we cannot take, or, well, we've been taking it, but we cannot get rid of is brown beer bottles. So what we're doing right now, we're picking them up, then we pay Meadamau to rent a dumpster, and we landfill them. We have no choice. Our outlet in Minneapolis, which is the only one anywhere around, has like 35,000 tons of brown bottles he can't get rid of. So consequently, they're not buying.
So you get rid of the recyclables in Minneapolis? Or
Well, it depends on the
Different
the
markets?
glass. The
Glass
glass,
goes-
everything goes all over the country. But we'd love to have you guys come out sometime. I know you'd find it interesting. And if you got some other questions, I've got my lead recycler here. She can answer all the day-to-day questions. I'm sure most of you know who she is. She's the lady who feeds the dogs. Come on up here, Martha. But, any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, you bet.
Kyle, can you tell us a little bit about what an actual waste audit is? Or
Well, we
Neil,
could-
I guess one or the other.
Well, it varies from place to place. Well, some of them did is some of the industries did it is you monitor of what percentage of take a garbage can and say, okay, how much of that garbage can was actually recyclable? And you can kind of come up with a percentage. And perhaps also how much is thrown in a recycling bin that is actually not recyclable. And then you can also monitor how much is coming into the landfill as actually watch as somebody's bringing in. Because right now we don't. My understanding is we don't much, at the landfill, kind of watch to see how much of that material is coming in. So that would be one way of doing it. That's what they're saying is. And then there's other ways to do it is it depends on what kind of service you want to offer. So you could just either do it at the household level, you just kind of monitor that. But it's primarily what it does is looks mostly at where your landfill part. So when somebody's bringing in a garbage load, you can kind of estimate out of that garbage load how much of that was perhaps recyclable or not. So there's lots of different models that I found from the industry, but it's just a suggestion that one or two things is either the provider could do it or the city could do it or a combination thereof. But it's kind of the term of studying what you're actually taking in or not taking in.
When you worked or got the information from some of the other cities, did you ask them how they polled their citizens or how they went about
I did.
asking what because we
Yeah.
went through this before. We had some people that were just emphatic that we needed to go to single stream. There's others that say just stay exactly where you're at, and there's others that say just get rid of it and just have drop-off sites and the people can participate if they want. But it's all across the board.
It is. The one that I would note is that Yankton did a community survey, but I think it was probably one or two questions out of their whole community survey of some sort. I did know that they did that, and that was one of their switch was apparently as a result of that. But it would be.
And they switched from what to what?
I don't know what they were before, but they're at single stream now. So.
Yeah, and whether, just piece of information, in the 90s, Yankton operated a single stream recycling sorting
Oh.
center
Okay. Yep.
in the 90s. And they closed because it bankrupted them.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if it was totally government funded, partially government, but when I worked for Toshiba, we visited their single stream recycling center, and the volume, actually, part of what they told us there, the volume in all of South Dakota isn't big enough to keep a single stream recycling facility going. And the other comment that they made at the time, if they had to transport the materials more than 200 miles, the energy balance was gone. They lost money on it if they had to go more than 200 miles. So what has happened is people end up making a storage facility and they store it long enough to where they can get a full truckload or multi-truckloads or whatever. So the comment of your spoken hub made me think of Mitchell isn't the center of the hub, Minneapolis is the center of the hub, and Sioux Falls is a bigger spoke, and Mitchell's a smaller spoke of that, and
Right.
and
It's just an
Brookings is
example,
a-
yeah.
Brookings is a spoke, and Watertown, and how they all either collect and transport maybe quarterly, biannually to a big enough facility that thinks, one, either they can make money at it, or two, they've just decided that we're going to have a recycling facility even if it costs us money.
Right. Well, regardless whether, to kind of follow up a little bit back on the audit, is, so regardless is how you have the system. One or two things is, if you do have a recycle, first of all, you got to store it somewhere. So somebody's got to either, one is some party has to deliver it somewhere, or another party has to come and get it. And so that's one of the things that you're running into too. But so again, it's back to geography, is how that's going to have a different factor on that. So regardless who collects it, you still got to store it somewhere too.
Councilor Rice, I think you're right on, exact on the single stream versus the sorting at the curbside, and that actually helps with the energy that you're talking about, because
I think
if
so,
they
too.
can store it, obviously they're there to make money, and that's an easier way or a better way, more efficient way to be profitable, and it sort of protects us as well, having that contractor, having the RFP, have the contractor maintain, manage, store, sort, and make sure they're profitable that way.
I guess the other piece to this is, what have other, whether they're private or government related, what have they done to increase participation? Well, how much advertising, I mean, yep, I could spend $200,000 a year on advertising for recycling type thing, but I mean, there's a break-even point there also. Or to me, it's whether we call what we have today single stream or whatever, I find it easy. I can put my cardboard there, throw my cans. I don't know how many brown beer bottles I have, but some, and put it all out there, and I can put it out there. To me, it's fairly easy, but obviously for others, if they're putting garbage in there, what can we do to make the participation rate
Right.
higher and make the participation more accurate?
I did find a couple studies where they've done some of them, and some different towns have done, but I think part of it is they just, you have to freshen up the campaign, if you will. Right now, we just, we do the newspaper articles and maybe those types of things. So that would be one thing, is to try to come up with a different, way people get their information is a whole lot different than they used to be. So that's probably number one, is to modernize the messaging of some sort, make it a little bit easier, accessible, and to adjust to the different generations and how they do that. That would be step number one. Number two is there are some resources, again, available from governmental entities or nonprofits and so forth. So that might be one way of, if we wanted to beef up our campaign, if you will, that we could try to tap into some of those free sources or low cost sources and see if we can model, make them model to Mitchell, so to speak. So that might be one way that you could do it. But the bottom line is the question is that I would come back to you with is, what's the acceptable what's the goal you're trying to accomplish? And then that's where you're equating the however many dollars you're putting into advertising, is it offsetting what is our goal for our participation rate? Do we want to get to 30%, 35, 40, whatever the number is? And then how would you measure that? And that's back to where I was talking about that. So I see where you're going with is, in other words, how are you getting your bang for your buck, if we had a lack of a better word? Or if you're investing it, are you investing in what return? Are you what are your expectations?
And just like you said, making it easier and convenient, I think you have a huge jump to participation. So even facilities downtown, public facilities, the schools, if you have bins that are recycling bins and you have a collection operation that actually picks them up and does recycling, I think that has a huge jump in your participation. The only other thing is if you do go to single stream pickup at the curb and they just pick everything up and they sort it somewhere else, that's a huge participation leap. But again, that ends up being slightly more expensive, and the product is more contaminated. So it may be a higher cost on the contract as well, because there's more sorting and their product isn't as clean.
Right. And
Did
if,
you have a comment you wanted to make?
Oh, when I was talking to Steve, and you were talking about what were we talking about? Units of.
Oh, yep.
Okay.
Energy. Yep.
What I was getting at is, on a single stream, I would have to probably double my force in order to sort all that. Okay.
yeah, I
But what
agree.
I was getting at is, if I have this many pop bottles equals 100%. For every bit of garbage I have to sort out, that lowers my.
Oh, yeah.
That's where I was going.
Yep.
That's where I was going.
Yep.
We weren't
Sure
at
does.
cross swords there.
Yep.
But,
I agree with you on that.
and now we've got a really good website to Dependable Recycling. Also, that's handled by our Aberdeen office, and she's really good at that.
Maybe I can make my example of energy balance in a little bit different way. One of the biggest wastes environmentally that they've estimated that happens is shipping water in bottles on trucks in any distance. Because the water is available at the tap, and there have been states that have outlawed selling bottled water. You go into a convenience store and they'll sell you a $1 container that's reusable,
Right.
and they'll have a refilling station.
Now, I just heard today,
Okay? So the energy of recycling the plastic bottle doesn't come anywhere near of paying back the energy of putting it in the bottle,
Right.
putting it in a truck, and transporting it 100, 150 miles, have somebody drink it, and then even if they're 100% recycled, all the plastic, the energy is still negative energy balance
I
for
agree.
getting you that water.
I agree. Now, I saw today where the styrofoam cups are being eliminated, but I also saw where I think it's Millennial in Sioux Falls is now going to add paper cups to its,
To their acceptance stream? To their, what they will take will be.
and that's all single stream.
Yeah, they'll take
Now,
paper cups?
The problem is, you take your garbage or your, 90-gallon container that they were talking about originally here, and you throw paper cups and paper plates, which are all recyclable as paper, and you can't get a paper plate clean. So that gets in there and it gets wet and it gets nasty. Number one, it's a health hazard to handle a lot of that stuff. I'm the biggest opponent of single stream there is, simply because it's so labor intensive and it's just so nasty to handle. We tried it in Watertown, it didn't work. They're baling everything together and shipping it off and let somebody else recycle it now, and it's costing them a fortune to do it. And that's our own company. And yet we're multi-streaming it at the curb, doing curbside pickup in Aberdeen and Mitchell, and it's being successful. So we've got a story on each side of that coin. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
one thing I want to follow up a little bit on, Steve, on you're talking about the campaign. One of the challenges in some of the research is, do you even just, because if people move here from another place, their expectation and what there was recyclable in their particular area may not be the same. And so that's one of the challenges that I think communities are having, is because we're more mobile, that people have an expectation of, well, maybe, well, this was recycled in my town and this, so that's one of the things that I think if we do, you really got to localize it. that messaging. That's just a
Yep.
follow-up.
Another question came to mind, and I guess I'm looking for successes of our recycling. We seem to do a great job of commercial cardboard recycling, or commercial cardboard and other materials. Is that because our commercial businesses are aware and we have the outlet for them, or is there anything we can learn there?
Mostly it's because I went out and got them. It's taken me 20 years to get them all, but.
Okay,
Yeah, and there's participation, obviously, like the big companies like your big superstores and outlets, they have their own program, so they
Yep.
bail themselves. But for us, as long as it's clean in the recycling stream, it's very successful. And I think the big increase too is how much residentially as well is being shipped home, and those boxes are being recycled and then sent out. So it's a big increase in cardboard.
Okay.
Say your name, please.
Yes. My name is Nancy Torgerson. There's been a lot of really good discussion, and I have a lot of notes. It's hard to not talk until the end. When you talk about education, I want to point out, personally, I rely on the newspaper, and the dependable ads state specifically what plastics they accept, and they do say it's more than just 1 and 2. I can't remember what numbers, but I know there's more than that on there from dependable. When you talk about education through the schools, we're going back to 1999. My daughter was in kindergarten in Rapid City. Mommy, we should recycle. Mommy, they're teaching us recycling. Rapid City didn't even have it yet. Now, in 2003, we moved to Mitchell, and so then we had some, at least by 2005, we had recycling. But the schools have been preaching this. I graduated in 1982. They were preaching it well before then. It's just taken a long time for industry and cities to catch up because it can be cost heavy. Another thing I would like to point out, my daughter was a student at USD starting in 2012. I don't know why the city of Mitchell doesn't do this. I said it last year during the carnival. Here's the garbage can. It's a big thing. This section is for pop bottles. This section is for plastic bottles. And this section is for everything else. They didn't try to sort out like your papers that you write reports and stuff on. It was just, this is everything else. They at least were making an effort at the university level. I want to compliment at least Mitchell Middle School. I sub sometimes over there. In the lunchroom, I don't remember if it's FCCLA or FBLA. They have a separate container for the plastic bottles that are generated during lunchtime because the kids can buy juice or water bottles or whatever. And they have someone actually standing guard at the garbage can. And if they see a plastic bottle, plastic over there, and remember not to throw away your silverware. So, education is out there, and there are some very simple steps that can be done. Granted, when you have the dump all your garbage here and put your cans here and your bottles here, some of it's gonna end up in the wrong place, but at least it's a proactive step that sets an example. Because in my house, my kids know I'm this fiend, and if you put it in the wrong spot, you're in trouble. Another thing I wanted to point out, you talk about the energy units generated by the recycling versus how much does it take to actually do it. My parents, who are the tail end of the Depression era generation, often wonder, but how much are we ruining the water when we're trying to wash out the recyclable container? And is that a moot point or is it a valid point? I don't know. But how does water focus into this? And if I have to rinse out my soap container of Tide 18 times, have I just negated anything that recycling that plastic bottle is going to do?
That's a very good point, because water is a resource.
And water is very finite, as we have learned. Another thing I wonder with the tonnages, of course, commercial is going to be more, cardboard is heavier, but plastics have become much, much, much thinner through the years too. And I'm actually putting probably, I'm going to pretend, 50 plastic bottles a week in my recycling bin now. That doesn't weigh as much as 10 plastic bottles weighed 10 years ago.
And you bring up the point in the plastics industry in the past, did the advertisement, they showed 2-gallon jugs of milk side by side.
Right.
And said, the jug on the left has 50% less plastic than the jug on the right, and it was made 3 years apart. And they reduced the plastic content by 50% and kept the strength. But that was through their innovation to try and the same thing happens. But to me, the question is, can we evolve to the point of having milk in a container that is either, I mean, you go back to glass and reusable, but the distances don't, dairies aren't located locally anymore.
Right.
But are there some other materials that it's either 100% recyclable easy, so is it made of paper or something else? Or something that hasn't been invented yet, or even the milk jug is, it was 100 grams, now it's 50 grams, and now it's 10 grams of plastic. And now I have 10% of the plastic in my milk jug that I had versus what I had in 2005.
Right. So, that's just going to affect the numbers. In the long run, it's probably good that the plastic is lighter, but it's just going to impact your numbers and look like fewer people are participating when, in fact, is it the same number participating? I don't know. But from a standpoint as a student and a parent, everybody says to recycle, then you become an adult and you start thinking more critically, and holy cow, if I have to haul this 10 miles, is it worth the price? And that's the balance that's going to be hard to strike. So that is the end of my notes, but what about the water, especially because we know water quality problems coming from other sources into Lake Mitchell, the phosphorus levels. What are we doing when we rinse that container 6 times or whatever to get it up to snuff so it can be recycled? So just one more avenue to think about.
And maybe some of that, and I don't know the places where Mitchell's materials are sent, but the facilities that I've visited, and one was in Yankton, another one's in Indianapolis, another one in Wisconsin. The amount of water they use for washing and other stuff is, compared to what I use in my sink to wipe something out, is tremendous compared to the amount of water I'm doing there. So is it even necessary for me to, I'll rinse it out, but if there's stuff in the cracks or crevices on the bottom of my plastic yogurt container or whatever, is that like, so what? It will eventually get washed out if it gets recycled. And I don't need to put 10 gallons down my sink trying to wash it to make it clean. And that's an education thing that just probably needs to come out with. That's going to be case by case and city by city and recycle sorting facility by recycle sorting facility.
Sure.
And that's really hard to, for me to be able to say the city's going to tell people don't wash it this much or only wash it that much. I don't think I can get there. I don't think I'll ever have the information.
Yeah, and that is a good point. And that was the other point. Kyle was talking about the World War II generation that says, yes, I recycle because I take that mayonnaise jar and I use it for this, and then I put my nails in it, and so on and so forth. My parents do that, but they also absolutely have a better grip on recycling probably than I do. So I don't know if my parents are the exception to the rule, but they really, really practice use it up, wear it out. And in the case of a plastic container, Jeff Foxworthy has a spiel he does about the matching salad bowls that all say Cool Whip on the side. Oh my God, did he go to my mom's house? And when it gets worn enough and washed often enough that mom thinks it's been used enough, then it goes into the recycling container. So I think they do have probably more ownership of taking care of the world than some of the younger people do. They just kind of go about it the long way around. And you got to use that Tupperware, that Cool Whip container for 6 years, and then you can recycle it. So anyway, education is happening, and if you don't want to have your city have any kind of recycling service, then you need to get in touch with your schools and contact them to stop using nationalized curriculum that says recycling is the way of the future. Because those little kids coming home really do have an impact. And if they see that what they're learning at school doesn't apply at home, oh, okay. You know, everybody should play nice and try to work together on the issue is my point. And, you know, thankfully Mitchell Middle School has one thing it's trying to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we currently have 26% participation in the city, correct? When they have drop-off locations, do you have any, I know it's like looking into a crystal ball, but generally speaking, what's the percentage of participation? No way to know?
You would have
Yeah.
no way of knowing.
Yeah.
Because you, first of all.
Well, you might be able to know based on a comparison of,
Well, you would have it based off of what you retrieve, but the hard part with those, what I've found is, one, is who's allowed to drop them off there? Because if you don't have a monitor, if you don't have anybody watching, are they necessarily Mitchell people per se? Could be anybody dropping them off. So that's the other point you have with regarding drop-off points. You wouldn't even, unless they're actually monitored or you have some type of access, to monitor it, So that's one way that they're hard to measure. Part of them, some of them do is the containers are actually owned by a company. And so you just say, okay, here, you get to put the container there, and so you wouldn't know however much they say, here, help yourself, take whatever you can get, so.
I think there's a couple of risks. If you're talking about
Yeah.
drop-off sites alone and no participation as far as pickup or curbside pickup, I think there's a couple of things. I think you would see a dramatic decline in
Yeah.
participation because again, it may be just difficult to get there. People don't want to do that, whereas curbside is easier. And again, monitoring it, whether there's someone there or a camera, a contamination is always a possibility. Okay, well, I'm just going to throw that in the dumpster, and then the whole stream is, I guess, less valuable.
Can I speak to that, please? We already have a drop-off set at our plant, and we average probably 2, maybe 3 people a day dropping off, and it's 99.9% out of town. So we do service. I've had people bring stuff clear from Highmore, for heaven's sakes.
So drop-off sites, in addition to curbside pickup and facilities in the public, like schools, downtown area, city hall, you have the festivals down here. Those areas, I think you would have a big increase in participation.
Okay. And maybe something for research, and that brought up a question that I was asked last week. Yes, I know we have the drop-off site at the old landfill, but one more frequent or other convenient drop-off sites other than that as a possibility, especially for electronics, cathode ray tube televisions, those types of things of sponsoring a monthly drop-off at some parking lot or city parking lot or something that whoever the recycle person is that.
Who's going to pay for the electronics? We can't get rid of them.
that there's still a fee to drop them off, just makes them much more easier to take them someplace and drop them off. I'm not saying that if I have 5 CRT TVs that I want to get rid of and I've got to pay $10 a piece to get rid of them or whatever, that I'm not going to pay that, but I'm probably not going to bring them out to the old landfill if I could bring them to the parking lot at City Hall. That's way easier.
And so maybe that's something we could include in the RFP, that there are certain drop-off sites, certain times of the year, and then the contractor can bid that out.
I mean, in the amount of computers and printers and other things that are obsolete in 3 years these days, my guess is if you're not getting many of them out there, they're all in our landfill.
Oh, I'm sure they are.
Does the landfill take TVs and
If you
Not
put-
legally.
Not legally. But if I put a printer in a plastic bag and put it in my garbage, in my bin, it goes to the landfill.
But part of the problem is the new televisions
The-
and the new electronics has almost no recycling value
I-
at all.
Yeah, I believe that. but-
I understand that, but
But yet, if you drop these off somewhere, unless
They-
whoever the hauler is, be it you, me,
and,
whoever.
and that may be
if they
part of the
don't charge for
RFP.
that, it's like tires, they get charged to
Yep.
get rid of it.
Yep.
So that has to be a consideration. There has to be.
No, we understand
Yeah, I
that.
understand
The
that.
problem is, right now, it's going to the landfill, which isn't desirable either,
You
so.
wouldn't know it by the amount of TVs we take in. We take a ton of them.
Well, I know there were a lot sitting at the curb over the last
Yeah.
week.
And that's what
Every time I go to a rummage sale,
that's what
I
prompted the
find
question
all
to
these
me when they saw TV sitting at the curb.
Yes, there were.
So in addition to that, we have an issue with colored glass or brown glass, which is just not a recyclable commodity anymore. The clear glass is, but if you think about beer bottles and wine bottles, that's a huge amount. Whereas still, I think the idea would be collect those, but they would ultimately get crushed and put in the landfill. And if we had that process, it's not necessarily recycling, but once the glass is crushed, I mean, it takes very little volume in the landfill. So it wouldn't really hurt the life of the landfill.
Kyle, when are you wanting some decision from us of the type of RFP to send out? What were you kind of thinking as far as timeline?
Well, if we could, over the next few months, let's say 3 months, and then we would be able to get an RFP out by August and get something decided by the end of the year. So 3 months, if we could have a draft, I could send that out to the council and we could get feedback based on the discussion here of what would be included with the RFP or what wouldn't be included to continue on for X number of years, 2 years or so.
And Neil, you'll get us your write-up or whatever?
Now that
Okay.
I've kind of gotten some of your feedback on it.
That will come to all of us?
Yeah, probably in the
And
next.
will it be available to the public?
Well, I don't, yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
Could be.
I'll
Could
get
put it on the website.
There's a lot of good
Yeah.
there's good information
Okay.
in there.
It's a lot of good information. And then we'll also have the contract. I mean, it's a government contract as well. So you'll have the RFP that we're under now, and then you'll have the information that Neil has collected, and then we can get some feedback on where to go on the next RFP.
Okay. Any other
Just a point. that
comments,
if-
testimony? Stephanie?
You'll probably have to have that discussion at a future meeting if it's
Yep.
going to shape an outcome of a decision.
Yes.
It can't be held.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, sorry if it we didn't mean to imply that the council was going to get information and then just decide something and tell Kyle. No, that will
Make sure
be,
nobody else
Then we would bring back a draft RFP to the council for review again and changes, and then go from there.
Okay. Okay. Okay, any other questions, comments? We have until 8 o'clock. Work expands to the time allotted. But it doesn't if nobody has any more input. So timeline, hopefully get that information out, and then by August, we'd have that discussion. That would also work with our budgeting process. I think that should give us, September final, and we would know that. And the current contract expires on the 31st of this year. Okay. If there are no other input items, then we will declare the meeting over.